"We're keeping the house. Find your way," my only son said, and left me by the roadside. The house behind those frost-covered fields wasn't just a building. It was where I'd spent sleepless nights cooling fever from my husband's forehead during his final months. Where I taught my son to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Where every floorboard creaked with memories of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings reading bedtime stories. Have you watched your own family treat you like a burden they needed to discard? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I never thought betrayal would come from my own flesh and blood. Last October, in the damp chill of an Ohio morning, my son pulled the car to the side of Route 62 and told me flatly, "We're keeping the house, find your way." Before I could even gather my purse, he drove off, leaving me staring at the frost-covered fields with nothing but my shoes sinking into gravel. That house wasn't just wood and stone, it was where I nursed his father through cancer, where every picture, recipe, and letter sat like a testimony to my life. Yet suddenly, with one signature I never recalled signing, it was gone. But houses hold more than walls, they hold records. And while my son thought he'd erased me with clever paperwork, he underestimated my silence. Have you ever felt completely invisible to someone who should love you most? Have you watched your own family treat you like a burden they needed to discard? Do you know someone whose children turned against them when money got involved? If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to save what they've built with their own hands, this story will shake you to your core. If your own family betrayed you like this, would you fight back or walk away? Subscribe. You'll need to see how this ends. Follow along as we uncover a mystery that's been buried in legal documents and false signatures for months. I'm about to show you how silence, paired with the right evidence, became my most powerful weapon against the people who thought they could erase me from my own life. The gravel crunched under my shoes as his taillights disappeared around the bend. "Find your way," he'd said, my own son, as if 37 years of motherhood meant nothing. The October air cut through my jacket, and I stood there watching morning commuters speed past on Route 62, their faces blurred behind windshields, completely unaware that a 72-year-old woman had just been abandoned like trash on the roadside. My name is Martha Henderson. 2 hours earlier, I'd been living in what I thought was my family home in Worthington, Ohio. Now I was homeless, holding nothing but a worn leather purse and wearing the same shoes I'd put on to help make breakfast for the grandkids. The house behind those frost-covered fields wasn't just a building. It was where I'd spent sleepless nights cooling fever from my husband's forehead during his final months. Where I taught my son to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Where every floorboard creaked with memories of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings reading bedtime stories. But according to the deed transfer papers my son had shown me that morning, papers I couldn't remember signing, none of that mattered anymore. My name was gone. Erased. As if I'd never existed. A pickup truck slowed down, the driver leaning out his window. "You all right, ma'am? Need help?" I straightened my shoulders. "I'm fine, thank you." The lie came easily. I wasn't fine. I was furious, hurt, and completely lost. But I wasn't broken. As the truck drove away, I started walking toward town, my mind racing. Something wasn't right about those papers. The signature looked like mine, but I couldn't recall the moment I'd signed them. The date didn't match my memory either. I'd been at the hospital with my husband during his final weeks, barely leaving his bedside except to grab coffee or use the restroom. When did I have time to sign deed transfers? The more I thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Why had my son been so eager to show me the papers instead of just explaining the situation? Why did he seem nervous when I asked to see the original documents? And why had he driven me away so quickly, like he was afraid I might ask more questions? Comment never signed if you'd start questioning every document you thought was safe. As I reached the edge of town, one thought kept circling in my mind like a vulture, that signature on the deed transfer. I never remembered signing it. And if I didn't sign it, who did? The cold morning air filled my lungs as I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. The spare key was still under the third flower pot. Inside, my reading chair sat exactly where I'd left it, but the family photos were gone. Every single frame that had held pictures of birthdays, anniversaries, and holiday gatherings now stood empty on the mantel like hollow eyes staring back at me. I'd walked the 3 miles from Route 62 back to what used to be my home, using the key I'd hidden years ago for emergencies. Never imagined I'd need it to break into my own house. The living room felt like a movie set. Everything looked normal from a distance, but up close, the details were wrong. My favorite throw blanket was folded too neatly. The coffee table books were stacked in a way I never would have arranged them. Even the couch cushions sat perfectly fluffed, like no one had ever lived here. I walked through each room, documenting what had changed. My bedroom, the one I'd shared with my husband for 15 years, was now a storage space. Boxes labeled "Martha's Things" sat stacked against the wall like I was already dead. Inside the first box, my reading glasses, some old sweaters, and a handful of greeting cards my grandchildren had made me. Everything else was gone. But they'd missed something. In the attic, tucked behind old Christmas decorations, sat my sewing basket. I'd forgotten about it myself until that moment, but muscle memory guided my hands to the spot where I used to hide important papers from my husband's curious eyes during surprise party planning. My heart pounded as I lifted the fabric scraps and pulled out a manila envelope I hadn't touched in months. Inside, insurance papers with my name clearly printed as beneficiary, mortgage statements showing my signature on the original loan, and something that made my hands shake, a draft copy of our will in my late husband's handwriting. The insurance papers were dated 6 months after I was supposedly removed from the deed. How could I be beneficiary on insurance for a house I no longer owned? The mortgage statements showed consistent payments from our joint account, with my signature authorizing each automatic withdrawal. But the will draft was the smoking gun. In my husband's careful handwriting, "House stays with Martha always. She nursed me through everything. She deserves security." Below his words, in different ink and unfamiliar handwriting, "Plans changed, see new documents attached." New documents I'd never seen. I sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by evidence that my memory was correct and the official papers were lies. Someone had been very busy rewriting my life while I grieved my husband's death. Someone who knew exactly where to find legal documents, how to forge signatures, and when I'd be too emotional to pay attention to details. Ever walked through a house that no longer felt like home? What would you have done? The insurance papers had my name typed clearly, dated 6 months after I was supposedly removed from the deed. Either these papers were wrong, or the deed transfer was a fraud. I was betting on fraud. My hands trembled as I lifted the fabric scraps. Underneath lay a manila envelope I'd forgotten, mortgage papers, insurance forms, and a draft will in my late husband's handwriting. But these weren't just any documents. These were the original copies, the ones that told the true story of our finances and final wishes. The sewing basket had been my secret filing system for years. While my husband organized important papers in his neat office folders, I kept backup copies hidden where only I would think to look. Call it woman's intuition, but I'd always felt better knowing we had duplicates somewhere safe. Now, sitting in that dusty attic with afternoon light filtering through a small window, those backup copies were about to save my life. The mortgage papers showed both our names on the original loan from 1987. Every refinancing document, every modification, every payment history. My signature appeared alongside my husband's on every single page. We were equal partners in this house purchase, equal owners of the property, equal responsible parties for the debt. But the insurance documents told an even more interesting story. The homeowner's policy listed me as primary beneficiary with full claim authority. The life insurance policy named me as sole survivor with complete property rights. Even the car insurance showed the house address with me as the resident owner. How do you remove someone from a deed while keeping them as the insurance beneficiary? You don't. Not legally. I spread the papers across the attic floor like puzzle pieces, looking for the pattern I knew had to be there. That's when I found the real treasure, my husband's handwritten notes on estate planning. His writing was shaky from the medication, but the words were clear: Martha gets house. She sacrificed career to care for me. This is her security. No one else touches this property. In the margin, he'd added, discuss with lawyer next week. Below his notes, in completely different handwriting and fresher ink, plans changed, family meeting held, new beneficiary arrangements, see attached transfer documents. My blood went cold. My husband died before that family meeting ever happened. I would have remembered a meeting about changing our will. I was with him every single day during his final month. Someone had added those margin notes after he was gone. I carefully photographed every document with my old flip phone, making sure the dates and signatures were clearly visible. Then I noticed something else that made my stomach drop. The attached transfer documents mentioned in the fake margin notes were dated 3 days after my husband's funeral. 3 days after the funeral, when I was barely functioning, someone had filed papers to transfer the house. Papers that required my signature and my presence at a notary office. Papers I had no memory of signing because I'd been sedated with grief medication prescribed by our family doctor. Document fraud victims lose everything while families profit. Subscribe before you become the next target. Screenshot those margin notes in your mind. You'll understand why later. In my husband's margin notes, house stays with Martha always. Below it, different ink, plans changed, see attached. The attached documents were signed while I was planning his burial, not signing legal papers. Someone had been very patient, very careful, and very cruel. But they'd underestimated my habit of keeping backup copies in places they'd never think to look. The clerk's name tag read, Patricia. She studied my documents for 3 long minutes before looking up with worried eyes. I'd chosen the Franklin County Recorder's Office deliberately, neutral ground where public records lived and government employees took their jobs seriously. Patricia was maybe 45. With graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and reading glasses that suggested years of examining documents. When I'd approached her window that Tuesday morning, I'd simply said, I need to verify some property transfer records. I think there might be discrepancies. She nodded and asked for my identification, then pulled up the computer records for my property address. That's when her expression changed from routine helpfulness to genuine concern. Ma'am, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure other customers weren't listening, can you step over to the consultation area? I think we need to look at this more carefully. The consultation area was a small table with 2 chairs near the back of the office. Patricia brought my file and a legal pad, her movements careful and deliberate. She spread out my original documents next to printouts from the county database. Tell me about these signatures, she said, pointing to the deed transfer. Do you remember signing this particular document? I explained about being at the hospital during my husband's final weeks, about the grief medication, about the timing that didn't match my memory. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Then she did something that surprised me. She pulled out a magnifying glass and examined the signatures closely, comparing them to other documents in the file that she knew were definitely mine, voting records, vehicle registrations, marriage license applications. Mrs. Henderson, she said finally, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen thousands of signatures, and I've learned to spot irregularities. She pointed to the deed transfer signature. This signature has consistent pressure and flow, which suggests it was traced or copied rather than written naturally. See how the ink density is exactly the same throughout? When people sign documents naturally, there are slight variations in pressure. She pulled out another document. Compare that to your marriage license signature from 15 years ago. See the natural variations? The slight hesitation before your middle initial? The way your hand lifted slightly between letters? That's how real signatures look. My heart started racing. A government official was confirming what I'd suspected. There's something else, Patricia continued. The filing timestamp shows this document was processed on a Sunday afternoon. We're closed Sundays. Our computer system doesn't even accept filings on weekends. She turned her computer screen toward me. See this? Filed 2:47 p.m., Sunday, October 15th, impossible. I felt like I was watching a detective solve a crime in real time. Patricia made several photocopies of my original documents, then stapled them together with her notes. Mrs. Henderson, I can't give you legal advice, but I can tell you this documentation raises serious questions about the validity of this transfer. You might want to consider having an attorney review these discrepancies. She handed me a business card from a stack near her desk. This lawyer specializes in property disputes. She's helped several seniors who've had similar complications with family transfers. As I prepared to leave, Patricia leaned closer and lowered her voice. One more thing. I'm going to pull the complete digital history of all filings related to your property. It'll take until Thursday, but I want to see if there are other irregularities we missed. Can you come back then? Flag Patricia's name. Government workers don't usually break protocol unless something's seriously wrong. Patricia handed me a receipt, full document history, ready Thursday. And Martha? Bring a witness. She paused. People don't usually forge documents just once. If someone did this to your deed, they probably filed other papers too. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the roadside abandonment: hope. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. I was the victim of a crime, and now I had a professional government employee willing to help me prove it. The computer screen showed 3 signatures, all supposedly mine, all with different timestamps, all signed while I was at my husband's bedside in the hospital. Patricia had called me Thursday morning with a tone I'd never heard from a government worker before, excitement mixed with outrage. Mrs. Henderson, you need to see this immediately. Bring that witness. I'd asked my neighbor Helen to come with me. She'd known our family for 20 years and remembered exactly where I'd been during my husband's final weeks. More importantly, she'd driven me to and from the hospital every single day because I'd been too upset to drive safely. Patricia's desk was covered with printouts, each one marked with colored highlighter. She'd spent 3 days pulling every document filed under my name and property address for the past 2 years. What she found made her question her faith in the system she'd served for 18 years. Look at this timeline, she said, pointing to a chart she'd created. October 3rd, deed transfer signed and notarized. October 10th, insurance beneficiary change filed. October 17th, mortgage modification submitted. October 24th, vehicle title transfer processed. She pulled out a hospital visitor log that Helen had helped me request. Now look at this. October 3rd through October 25th, you signed in and out of the hospital every single day. Your husband was in the ICU. The nurse's notes show you barely left his room except to use the restroom. The impossibility was staggering. According to the official records, I'd been signing legal documents all over Columbus while simultaneously maintaining a bedside vigil 20 miles away. Here's what really made me angry, Patricia continued. She pulled up a screen showing digital signatures with timestamps. 3 different notaries supposedly witnessed your signatures on 3 different days. I called all 3 offices. 2 of them said they'd never seen you before in their lives. Helen leaned forward. What about the 3rd one? The 3rd one was interesting. Patricia's voice got quiet. The notary remembered your daughter-in-law coming in with a power of attorney document. She signed papers on your behalf, claiming you were too ill to travel. My hands went cold. I never gave anyone power of attorney. I know. I checked. No power of attorney was ever filed in this county with your signature. Patricia turned her computer screen toward us. But someone created one anyway. Look at this signature. The power of attorney document showed my signature, but under a magnifying glass, it was obviously copied from something else. The ink was too uniform, the pressure too consistent, and the spacing was mathematically perfect, like someone had traced it very carefully. They counted on you never checking the timestamps. Subscribe to learn the tricks they don't want you to know. Helen squeezed my hand. This is criminal, Martha. This isn't just family drama. Patricia nodded grimly. Mrs. Henderson, I've printed copies of everything. But you need to understand, this level of document fraud usually involves multiple people. Someone knew the system well enough to file papers in 3 different offices on specific dates when certain clerks were working. Digital records don't lie, but people do. What's the worst document deception you've seen? 3 signatures, 3 different dates, all while the hospice logs showed I never left building 412. Someone had been very busy destroying my life while I was trying to save my husband's. The attorney didn't look up from my papers for 5 full minutes. When he finally spoke, "This isn't sloppy work. This is methodical." David Martinez had been practicing elder law for 23 years, and Patricia had recommended him specifically for property fraud cases involving family members. His office was small but organized, with law books covering every wall and a desk that looked like it belonged to someone who actually read every document that crossed it. When I'd called for an appointment, his secretary had asked me to bring every piece of evidence I'd collected. Now those papers covered his conference table like pieces. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to understand what we're looking at here," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "This isn't someone making a mistake or cutting corners. This is a systematic effort to transfer your assets using forged documents, fake witnesses, and fraudulent timestamps." He pointed to the deed transfer. Whoever did this knew enough about property law to file in the correct sequence. First the deed transfer, then the insurance changes, then the mortgage modifications. They understood that certain documents trigger automatic notifications to other agencies. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of notifications? Tax assessments, insurance updates, voter registration changes. When you transfer a deed, it starts a chain reaction of government updates. Someone knew that chain reaction would help legitimize the fraud. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. The question is, who in your family has legal training or access to someone who does? That question hit me like a punch. My son worked in insurance sales, but he'd never shown interest in legal details. His wife, however, had worked as a paralegal before the kids were born. She'd left that job years ago, but she'd kept her notary commission active for helping neighbors with documents. "My daughter-in-law is a notary," I said quietly. David's pen stopped moving. "Tell me about her background." I explained about her paralegal training, her notary commission, her access to all our family documents during the years I'd lived with them. As I talked, David's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Henderson, this case has all the hallmarks of professional document fraud. The person who did this understood filing deadlines, witness requirements, and notary protocols. They also had intimate access to your personal information, social security number, signature samples, knowledge of your daily schedule." He stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. "I'm going to file an emergency motion to preserve all remaining assets and freeze any pending transactions. But I need you to understand something important. Cases like this often involve more fraud than we initially discover. We need to check your bank accounts, credit reports, and any other legal documents you've signed recently." My heart sank. "You think there's more?" "I think whoever did this spent months planning it. People don't usually stop with property fraud when they have complete access to someone's personal information." He pulled out a thick legal form. "This preservation order will stop any new transactions while we investigate, but Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you a difficult question." I braced myself. "During the time you were caring for your husband, did anyone else have access to your mail, your checkbook, or your identification documents?" The answer made my blood run cold. They had everything. I was so focused on my husband's care that I let them handle all the household paperwork. Mail, bills, bank deposits. They said they were helping me during a difficult time. David wrote something on his legal pad, then looked at me with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "Mrs. Henderson, we're not just looking at property fraud. We're looking at identity theft on a massive scale. Sunday notarizations are impossible in Ohio. They hoped you'd never check. Subscribe to stay ahead of document scams." The preservation order went to the county courthouse at 4:47 p.m. By morning, all property transactions would be frozen. But David's final words echoed in my mind. People who steal houses usually steal everything else too. County offices close Sundays. Banks close Sundays. Yet according to the filing stamps, my signature was notarized at 2:15 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. David had discovered this impossibility while cross-referencing the notary public database with county filing records. We sat in his office Monday morning, surrounded by evidence that grew more damning by the hour. David had spent his weekend making phone calls to notary offices, county clerks, and bank managers. Each conversation had revealed another layer of the fraud. "The notary stamp on your deed transfer belongs to Jennifer Walsh," he said, reading from his notes. "I called her office Friday afternoon. She told me she worked for your daughter-in-law's former law firm until 2019, when she moved to Florida. She hasn't notarized a document in Ohio since she moved." I stared at the deed transfer document. So how is her stamp on my papers? Either someone stole her official stamp, or someone created a fake one. Both are felonies. David pulled out another document. But here's what really caught my attention. I called the Secretary of State's office to verify Ms. Walsh's notary commission. They told me her license was suspended for 6 months in 2018 for improper witnessing procedures. My hand started shaking. Suspended for what? She notarized documents without the signer being present. The suspension ended 3 weeks after she supposedly witnessed your signature. He pointed to the date stamp. "Mrs. Henderson, even if Jennifer Walsh had been in Ohio that Sunday, she wasn't legally authorized to notarize anything." The room felt like it was spinning. Someone had used an out-of-state, suspended notary stamp to authenticate forged documents on a day when government offices were closed. The level of planning was terrifying. David opened his laptop and showed me a database screen. I also checked the county's electronic filing system. Documents can only be submitted during business hours, Monday through Friday. The system automatically rejects weekend submissions. He scrolled down to show me the error logs. But someone with administrative access can override those rejections and manually enter timestamps. That requires either hacking the system or having help from someone who works in the county office. You mean someone inside the government helped them? Or someone with enough technical knowledge to bypass the security protocols? Either way, this fraud required multiple people with specialized skills. David closed his laptop. "Mrs. Henderson, I've filed fraud charges with the prosecutor's office. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is organized crime. Ever sign something on a Sunday? Now you know why that's a red flag." The notary's license showed a 6-month suspension ending 3 weeks after she supposedly witnessed my signature. A dead notary's stamp, an impossible Sunday filing, and security overrides that suggested inside help. My quiet son and his paralegal wife had turned document fraud into a criminal conspiracy. The phone call was 2 words: order granted. I didn't celebrate. I held my breath and waited for the storm. David had warned me that preservation orders make guilty parties desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. I was staying at Helen's house now, sleeping on her couch and trying to process the fact that my entire family had conspired to steal my life savings while I grieved my husband. The preservation order meant no one could sell the house, access the joint accounts, or transfer any remaining assets until the investigation was complete. It also meant my son would finally understand that I wasn't going away quietly. The first call came at 6:43 a.m. I recognized his number but didn't answer. He left a voicemail that Helen and I listened to over coffee. "Mom, you're making a huge mistake. These legal fees are going to eat up everything anyway. Just drop this nonsense and we can work something out." The second call came an hour later. This time he sounded angry. "You're embarrassing the whole family. The neighbors are asking questions. Do you want everyone to know our private business?" By the third call, his wife was on the phone too. Their voices were strained, and I could hear panic underneath the anger. "Martha, we can explain everything. There are things you don't understand about the financial situation. Meet us tonight and we'll show you the real numbers." Helen looked at me over her coffee cup. "They sound scared." I nodded. Good. The fourth call came from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Mrs. Henderson? This is Sarah Chen from First National Bank. We've received a court order freezing certain accounts, and we need you to come in to verify some transaction histories." That afternoon, Helen drove me to the bank. Sarah Chen was a manager in her 30s who looked like she'd been dealing with financial fraud cases for years. She led us to a private office and spread out account statements that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Henderson, these accounts show systematic withdrawals over the past 18 months. Small amounts each month, always under the reporting threshold. Someone was very careful to avoid triggering fraud alerts. The numbers were devastating. Over $47,000 had been slowly drained from accounts I thought were untouched since my husband's death. Attend or avoid? What would you do? 3 missed calls from my son. The fourth message was different. We need to talk. Tonight. But now I knew exactly what we'd be talking about. $47,000 in stolen money and a house they couldn't sell because a judge had frozen everything they tried to steal. He sat across from me at the same table where I'd taught him to do homework. His first words, "You don't understand the bigger picture." It was Tuesday evening, and I'd agreed to meet them at the house, my house, with Helen as my witness and David on speed dial. My daughter-in-law Jessica sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild called to the principal's office. She'd been avoiding eye contact since I walked in, which told me everything I needed to know about who had actually planned this scheme. The bigger picture? I kept my voice calm. Explain it to me. My son, I was having trouble thinking of him as my son anymore, pulled out a folder of papers. Dad's medical bills were huge. The insurance didn't cover everything. We had to take loans against the house just to pay the hospitals. Show me the bills. I'd learned from David to ask for documentation of every claim. He shuffled through the papers but couldn't find what he was looking for. Jessica reached over and opened a different folder. Here. See? $30,000 in medical debt that wasn't covered. I looked at the bills. They were real, but they were also old, from my husband's initial cancer diagnosis 3 years ago, not from his final hospitalization. Bills we'd already paid using our savings and his life insurance policy. These are from 2019, I said. We paid these with the insurance money. Jessica's hands tightened in her lap. There were additional expenses. Things you weren't aware of during your grief period. Such as? My son looked uncomfortable. Legal fees for estate planning. Accountant fees for tax preparation. Property maintenance costs while you were at the hospital. I almost laughed. You're telling me you stole $47,000 to pay for lawn care? We didn't steal anything. Jessica finally looked at me directly. We were protecting family assets from nursing home costs. If you'd needed long-term care, Medicaid would have taken everything. We were preserving your legacy for the grandchildren. It was a reasonable-sounding lie, the kind that might work on someone who didn't understand Medicaid law. But David had explained the 5-year look-back rules to me. Hiding assets from Medicaid by transferring them to family members was fraud, not protection. Jessica, I said quietly, did you really think I wouldn't find out? She glanced at my son, and I saw something pass between them, fear, guilt, and the realization that their careful plan was collapsing. The Sunday notarization, I continued. Jennifer Walsh's suspended license. The timestamp overrides in the county system. Did you think I was too old and grief-stricken to notice the details? Jessica went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you planned every step. I stood up from the table. The question is, who else helped you? Because this level of fraud required more expertise than a paralegal and an insurance salesman could manage alone. Family manipulation runs deepest because they know your soft spots. Subscribe to learn how to stay strong when blood turns cold. As he talked, I counted 3 new names. People who helped with the paperwork when I was too emotional to handle business. A lawyer friend of Jessica's, a notary from her old firm, and someone from the county office who expedited the filings as a favor. Would you have kept quiet and listened, or confronted them immediately? The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. And now I had names to give to David and the prosecutor. The insurance agent remembered me perfectly. You called asking about the policy change. I told you we'd need your signature, but someone else called back and canceled. It was Wednesday morning, and I was making phone calls from Helen's kitchen, following up on the names my son and Jessica had accidentally revealed during our confrontation. I'd started with Margaret Torres at Nationwide Insurance. She'd handled our homeowner's policy for 12 years and knew my voice immediately when I called. Mrs. Henderson. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Your daughter-in-law called last month asking about removing you as the primary policyholder, but when I explained the paperwork requirements, she said you'd changed your mind. My blood pressure spiked. What paperwork requirements? Well, you'd need to sign the change forms in person, with proper identification. When I explained that to Jessica, she seemed frustrated and said she'd have you call me directly to cancel the change. But you never called. I thanked Margaret and immediately called our bank loan officer, Robert Kim. I'd worked with him on our mortgage refinancing 2 years ago, and he remembered the details of our account clearly. Oh, Martha, yes. Your son called asking about adding his name to the mortgage as a co-borrower. I told him that would require both you and your husband to sign new documents, but when he explained that your husband was in hospice, I said we'd need medical documentation to proceed. What kind of documentation? Either a power of attorney or a doctor's letter confirming that your husband was competent to make financial decisions. Your son said he'd get back to me, but I never heard from him again. Robert paused. Should I have? Did you want to add him to the loan? I assured Robert that no changes were needed and asked him to flag our account for any unusual activity. Then I called the contractor who'd done work on our house 6 months ago. Tom Patterson remembered the job clearly. New flooring in the kitchen and bathroom. But his memory of the payment arrangements was disturbing. Your daughter-in-law handled all the financial details, he said. She explained that you were dealing with your husband's final illness and had given her authority to manage household expenses. She paid with checks from your joint account. Did I ever sign anything? Jessica brought me a signed contract and a copy of what she said was your power of attorney. I assumed everything was legitimate because she had all the right paperwork and knew details about your finances that only family would know. The pattern was becoming clear. Jessica had been impersonating me for months, using forged power of attorney documents to manage my financial affairs while I was focused on my husband's care. She'd been systematic and patient, building a paper trail that would support the eventual property transfer. The accomplice was hiding in plain sight. Did you see it coming? 4 different businesses. For instances of someone claiming to speak for me. All the same voice, my daughter-in-law. She'd been practicing identity theft while serving me dinner and helping with my husband's medications. The conspiracy had been happening right under my nose, disguised as family support during a crisis. The bank records showed cash withdrawals I never made, using a signature card I never signed, on dates I could prove I was elsewhere. Sarah Chen had called me back to the bank Thursday morning with news that made my hands shake. The fraud was far worse than anyone had imagined. Mrs. Henderson, we've completed the full account analysis you requested, she said, spreading statements across the conference table. What we found suggests systematic financial abuse over an 18-month period. Helen squeezed my hand as Sarah walked us through the timeline. Small withdrawals had started 3 months after my husband's diagnosis, always in amounts under $500 to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. But the pattern was unmistakable, withdrawals every 2 weeks, always on Thursdays, always from the same ATM location near Jessica's old workplace. The signature card for ATM access was filed 6 months ago, Sarah continued. According to our records, you came in personally to add this access method to your account. She showed me a signature that looked like mine but felt wrong somehow. Too perfect, too consistent. I never came here to add ATM access. I don't even use ATMs. I'd always preferred speaking to tellers for any banking needs, a habit my husband had teased me about for years. Sarah nodded. I suspected that. The signature matches your account documents, but the behavior pattern doesn't match your banking history. You've never used automated services in the 12 years you've banked with us. She pulled out security footage on her laptop. This is from the day the signature card was filed. The video showed a woman about my height and build, wearing a hat and sunglasses, approaching the teller window. But when the woman turned slightly, I could see it wasn't me. That's Jessica, I said quietly. My daughter-in-law. The teller who processed this transaction no longer works here, but her notes indicate the customer provided proper identification and seemed familiar with all your account details. Sarah's expression was grim. Mrs. Henderson, someone had access to your driver's license, social security card, and intimate knowledge of your banking habits. Helen leaned forward. How is that possible? Identity theft within families is unfortunately common, Sarah explained. The perpetrator has legitimate access to personal documents and knows enough personal information to answer security questions convincingly. I felt sick thinking about all the times Jessica had helped me organize paperwork during my husband's illness. She'd offered to file important documents, pay bills, and handle banking while I focused on caregiving. I'd been grateful for her help and never questioned her motives. There's more, Sarah said. We found evidence of check forgery as well. Someone has been writing checks from your account to cash, using your checkbook but with signatures that don't quite match your natural writing pattern. She showed me photocopies of checks I'd supposedly written to cash, in amounts ranging from $200 to $800. Each check was dated during periods when I could prove I'd been at the hospital with my husband. The check serial numbers are consecutive, suggesting someone had physical possession of your checkbook for extended periods. Sarah highlighted the dates. 23 checks over 14 months, totaling nearly $18,000. Combined with the ATM withdrawals, the total theft was approaching $70,000, money I'd been saving for my own long-term care, money my husband had wanted me to have for security in my old age. Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you something difficult, Sarah said. During your husband's illness, did anyone else have access to your purse, your mail, or your personal documents? The answer made me feel foolish. They had everything. Jessica said she was helping me stay organized during a stressful time. She picked up my mail, balanced my checkbook, even kept my identification documents in a safe place, so I wouldn't lose them while rushing back and forth to the hospital. Elder financial abuse steals $36 billion yearly. They assume you won't fight back. Subscribe to learn the warning signs. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Henderson, this wasn't opportunistic. Someone planned this systematically, using your grief and distraction as cover for an extensive theft operation. 18 months of planning to rob his own mother. What kind of person does that? The bank manager whispered, Mrs. Henderson, this wasn't opportunistic. This was planned for at least 18 months. 18 months of my own family slowly draining my life savings while pretending to care for me during the worst period of my life. The certified letter was elegant and threatening. Drop all legal action or face countersuit for harassment. My response was shorter, see you in court. David had warned me this would happen. When thieves get cornered, they try to flip the script and make their victims look like the criminals. The letter came from Harrison and Associates, a law firm downtown that specialized in what they called family dispute resolution. The language was polished and intimidating, full of legal terms designed to scare an elderly woman into backing down. Your unfounded accusations of fraud have caused significant emotional distress to our clients, the letter read. Your son and daughter-in-law acted in good faith to protect family assets during a difficult period. Their actions were legal, documented, and in your best interests during a time when you were unable to make sound financial decisions due to grief and medication. The letter went on to claim that I was suffering from age-related confusion, and that my false allegations were damaging their reputations in the community. They demanded I retract all statements to authorities and pay for their legal fees, or face a lawsuit for defamation and elder harassment. I read the letter twice, then called David. "This is exactly what I expected," he said when I read him the demands. "They're trying to intimidate you into dropping the case before it goes to trial. The good news is that this letter actually helps our case." "How?" "They're not denying they transferred your property and accessed your accounts. They're claiming they had the right to do it. That's an admission of the actions we're alleging, just with a different interpretation of the legality." David had been building our counter case for 2 weeks, and the evidence was overwhelming. We had the impossible Sunday notarizations, the suspended notary's stamp, the forged signatures, the ATM surveillance footage, and testimony from multiple witnesses who remembered Jessica impersonating me. "Here's what we're going to do," David said. "We're going to respond with a comprehensive filing that includes all our evidence, witness statements, and documentation of the systematic theft. We're also adding additional charges based on what the bank discovered." That afternoon, we spent 3 hours in David's office preparing our response. Instead of a threatening letter, we filed a detailed legal brief with the court, complete with photographs, bank records, hospital logs, and witness affidavits. The document was 43 pages of methodical evidence that told a story of calculated exploitation. "The beauty of this approach," David explained, "is that we're not engaging in a war of words. We're letting the facts speak for themselves." Our filing included charges of elder abuse, identity theft, forgery, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Each charge was supported by specific evidence and witness testimony. We weren't just asking for the return of my property. We were asking for criminal prosecution and full restitution of stolen funds. The most powerful part of our response was a timeline David had created, showing exactly where I was during each alleged signature event, cross-referenced with hospital visitor logs, prescription pickup records, and even grocery store receipts that Helen had helped me save. Ever been told to back down when you knew you were right? What did you do? Justice only works when evidence is preserved properly. Subscribe to learn how to protect your documents before it's too late. The hearing was set for Friday at 9 a.m. By Thursday night, I had witnesses, documents, and something they didn't expect: recordings of our kitchen table confrontation that Helen had made with her phone, capturing their admissions about the co-conspirators and their planning timeline. We weren't just fighting fraud anymore. We were exposing a criminal network. Judge Martinez read the evidence summary for 12 minutes without looking up. When she finally spoke, "This is the most systematic case of elder abuse I've seen this year." The Franklin County Courthouse felt smaller than I'd expected, but the weight of justice filling that room was enormous. I sat behind David at the plaintiff's table, with Helen beside me for moral support. Across the aisle, my son and Jessica sat with their attorney, Mr. Harrison, who looked considerably less confident than his threatening letter had suggested. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and reading glasses that she used like a weapon, peering over them when she wanted to emphasize a point. She'd clearly read every page of our 43-page filing, and her questions to the defense were surgical. "Mr. Harrison," she began, "your clients claim they had power of attorney to conduct these transactions. Please present that document to the court." Harrison shuffled through his papers nervously. "Your Honor, the power of attorney was informal. A verbal arrangement during Mrs. Henderson's period of grief following her husband's illness." "Counselor, are you telling this court that your clients conducted $70,000 in financial transactions based on a verbal power of attorney?" The judge's tone could have frozen water. "Well, no, Your Honor. They had documented authority based on Mrs. Henderson's incapacity during her bereavement period." "Show me the medical documentation of this alleged incapacity." More paper shuffling. "We're still gathering those records, Your Honor." Judge Martinez turned to David. "Mr. Martinez, please present your evidence regarding Mrs. Henderson's alleged incapacity." David stood and handed the bailiff a thick folder. "Your Honor, we have hospital visitor logs showing Mrs. Henderson maintained a consistent daily schedule caring for her husband. Prescription records showing she managed complex medication schedules independently. Banking records showing she conducted routine transactions appropriately during this period. And testimony from medical staff confirming her competency throughout her husband's treatment." The judge reviewed the documents while the courtroom sat in absolute silence. I could hear my son breathing heavily behind me, and Jessica was twisting her hands in her lap so violently I was afraid she might hurt herself. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Martinez said finally, "your client's defense relies on proving Mrs. Henderson was incapacitated during the period in question. The evidence suggests the opposite. She was actively managing complex caregiving responsibilities, making appropriate medical decisions, and maintaining consistent daily routines." She held up one of the bank surveillance photos. This photograph shows someone other than Mrs. Henderson using her identification to access her accounts. "How do your clients explain this?" Harrison whispered frantically with Jessica before responding. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson had given her daughter-in-law permission to handle banking during her difficult period." "Permission documented how?" "Verbal permission, Your Honor." Judge Martinez removed her reading glasses completely. "Counselor, verbal permission does not authorize identity fraud, signature forgery, or the use of suspended notary stamps to authenticate fraudulent documents." She turned to the surveillance evidence David had submitted. "The court has reviewed the timeline evidence submitted by the plaintiff. The defendants allegedly conducted notarized transactions on Sundays when county offices were closed, using the stamp of a notary whose license was suspended at the time, while Mrs. Henderson was documented to be elsewhere." Harrison tried one last desperate argument. "Your Honor, these were family financial arrangements intended to protect assets from potential nursing home costs." "Counselor, hiding assets from Medicaid through fraudulent transfers is also illegal." Judge Martinez's voice was final. "The court finds clear and convincing evidence of systematic elder financial abuse, identity theft, and document fraud." She looked directly at my son and Jessica. "The defendants will immediately cease all control over plaintiff's assets. Full property ownership is restored to Mrs. Henderson. All fraudulent transfers are hereby voided. From abandoned on the roadside to vindicated in court. Did you believe justice would win? Asterisk. The judge's final words, criminal referral filed. Detective Morrison will be in touch." My son went pale, and Jessica started crying silently. But I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the weight of injustice lifting from my shoulders. Justice wasn't just possible, it was happening, one documented fact at a time. The keys felt heavier in my palm than they had 6 months ago. The house looked exactly the same, but I was different. Walking up the front steps of my home, truly my home again, I realized that this fight had changed me in ways I was still discovering. Helen helped me move my belongings back from her house, but the transition felt strange. The rooms held memories now of betrayal and violation, not just the comfort of family life. My reading chair sat in the same spot, but I saw it differently, as evidence that had helped prove my case, not just furniture. The legal resolution had been swift once Judge Martinez made her ruling. My son and Jessica had 48 hours to remove any belongings they'd moved into the house and return all financial documents they'd taken. David had supervised the exchange, making sure nothing else disappeared during their departure. I hadn't spoken to my son since the courtroom. He tried to approach me after the judge's ruling, but David had intervened, explaining that any communication should go through the attorneys until the criminal investigation was complete. Detective Morrison had indeed contacted me, and the case had been forwarded to the district attorney's office for prosecution. The financial restitution would take time. The $70,000 they'd stolen was tied up in investments and purchases they'd made with my money. David was confident we'd recover most of it, but it would require additional legal proceedings to trace and reclaim the funds. What surprised me most was how I felt about the grandchildren. They were innocent victims in this situation, caught between parents who'd chosen crime over integrity and a grandmother they barely understood. I decided to set up a trust fund for their education, managed by an independent trustee, so they wouldn't suffer for their parents' choices. The house felt too big now, too full of memories that were both precious and painful. I'd been thinking about selling it and moving to a smaller place, maybe closer to Helen, who'd proven herself to be more family to me than my own blood relatives. But first, I had something important to do. The community center had called me the week after the court hearing. Word had spread through the senior network about my case, and other elderly residents were coming forward with similar stories of family financial abuse. The center director asked if I'd be willing to share my experience and the lessons I'd learned. That's how I found myself standing in front of 35 seniors on a Tuesday evening, sharing the most painful story of my life in hopes of helping others avoid the same trap. The most important thing I learned, I told them, is that love doesn't steal. Real family protects you, even when you're vulnerable. If someone who claims to love you is asking you to sign documents you don't understand, or taking control of your finances, for your own good, that's not love. That's exploitation. I showed them copies of the warning signs David had helped me identify: requests for power of attorney during emotional crises, offers to simplify financial management, and family members who discouraged outside professional advice. When you survive betrayal, do you become bitter or become a beacon? What would your choice be? As I unlocked the door, a neighbor approached. "Martha, my daughter's having similar problems. Could you help?" The pain of my experience was becoming a bridge to help others, and suddenly the house felt like home again, not just a place I'd fought to keep, but a foundation for building something better. They didn't need revenge stories. They needed practical wisdom: how to document everything, whom to trust, when to fight, and when to walk away with dignity. 3 months after my court victory, I was sitting in the community center every Tuesday evening, teaching other seniors how to protect themselves from the kind of betrayal I'd survived. The group had grown from 5 people to 23. We called ourselves the Document Defenders, and we met in the same room where I'd first shared my story. Each week, someone new would arrive with a folder of suspicious papers or a story that sounded eerily familiar to mine. Eleanor brought bank statements showing mysterious withdrawals her son claimed were for home maintenance. Robert had discovered his daughter-in-law was using his credit cards for personal shopping while claiming to buy his groceries. Maria found out her power of attorney documents had been used to sell property she never intended to transfer. I taught them Patricia's signature analysis techniques, David's timeline documentation methods, and Sarah's banking security protocols. Most importantly, I taught them that being old doesn't mean being powerless, and that family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior. Trust but verify, I would tell them, holding up copies of the evidence that had saved my case. Love your family, but protect your assets with professional oversight. And remember, real power of attorney documents are signed in front of witnesses and notarized in your presence, never handled by family members who claim they're helping you avoid the hassle. The sessions weren't just about fraud prevention. They were about rebuilding confidence in people who'd been made to feel foolish, helpless, or greedy for questioning their family's motives. I watched confidence return to faces that had been clouded with shame and self-doubt. Detective Morrison attended one of our meetings to explain the criminal justice process and encourage people to report suspicious activity. The district attorney's office had started a special elder abuse prosecution unit, partly because cases like mine were becoming more common. My son and Jessica eventually pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and community service. They were required to attend financial crime prevention classes and were prohibited from serving as power of attorney for any elderly relatives. My son sent me a letter apologizing, but I wasn't ready to read it yet. Maybe someday. Subscribe to stay informed about elder rights. Your future self, and your family, will thank you for watching. The real victory wasn't getting my house back or recovering my money. It was discovering that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and that strength could be shared to help others facing similar battles. Drop the one piece of advice you'll carry with you from Martha's story. Cool autumn air, familiar house keys, and the knowledge that silence paired with evidence can move mountains. One document at a time. The story was finally written in a hand that won't be erased.